Jaya Sriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. Surya Vangsha Jayate. Om Hri Om. Namaste, everyone. It is absolutely my pleasure, my honor, my privilege to be here with you this evening. Welcome to our latest satsanga. And before we dive into the topic for today, which is the divine ontology of Shakti-Shaktiman, before we dive into this, first I just want to make a few very quick announcements. First of all, I'm very happy to tell people that our brand new book is out, and that book is Principles of Perfect Leadership. This book just came out approximately 2 days ago or so, and it is available right now on Amazon. I believe that the link is there in the chat, so if you have a chance, please feel free to get that book. It is a book that focuses very specifically on, indeed, leadership. What does it mean to be a true leader? What is a false leader? How does an individual become a leader? And a leader in every way, a leader of your community, a leader on a small scale, but especially a leader on a very big scale, a very large scale. This is why, again, we didn't play games with the title of the book. It is Principles of Perfect Leadership. And again, if your goal is in time to indeed become a leader, and a good leader, meaning an individual who will help to lead us into the golden age, this is the book for you. The book itself consists of many aphorisms, and it is designed to be essentially a sutra work. But I'm not going to go too deeply into this because next week, indeed, we will have a virtual book reading, book signing, let's say. As of right now, I don't even have a copy of the book. I just ordered it about 2 days ago. It hasn't arrived yet. But I'm hoping that by the next time we get together, next Monday, I will have copies of the book and I'll be able to hold it up and show you what it looks like. And again, we will have a very nice reading from that book, from Principles of Perfect Leadership. A few more very quick things I just want to say, and that is, for those of you who are not aware, we have a Discord server that is dedicated to the ISDS, and again, I'm sure someone will put the link in the description. And this Discord server is quite unique. It's not like other Discord servers. It's not a general chat place. Rather, it is a place for serious and sincere individuals, people who have gravitas, people who truly want to know what is the meaning of life in accordance with Sanatana Dharma, the Vedic tradition, and who are ready to approach that question with the requisite humility and sincerity necessary in order to have the answers. If what I just described fits you, then please feel free to join our Discord server. And right now we have many hundreds of people on there and wonderful discussions that are taking place. If you have further questions about Sanatana Dharma that we don't have an opportunity or time to answer on this live stream, for example, if you go there, there are many, many individuals who have been on this path for some time who would be very, very happy to very humbly answer your questions and lead you in the right direction. So with that, I want to dive into the topic for today, which again is the divine ontology of Shakti-Shaktiman. And before I dive into the actual verse that we're going to be looking at, which is from the Lakshmi Tantra, first I want to talk a little bit about what is the actual meaning of this term, Shakti-Shaktiman, because not everyone is necessarily familiar with this term. It's a very technical term. It's quite literally a metaphysical term in Sanskrit. And what it is referring to very specifically is this, and I'll give you a little bit of background just as briefly as I can, again, before we dive into the verse. The idea of God, the highest conception of the absolute, of the divine as exists within Sanatana Dharma, is quite unique. And that is that we believe that God ultimately is of necessity, philosophically, a unitary being. God is one being. So thus we are panentheistic monotheists. We believe that there is one God. As far as all the philosophical arguments for why that is the case, that's very easy to go into, but that's not the point of what I'm talking about now. Maybe in the future I'll talk about that at some point. But we believe that God is one. However, at the same time, metaphysically speaking, we also have a very unique take on what is the nature of that one being, of that one God. And that is that, on the one hand, though God is one, God can be also seen as a dual being, and that is as God, Goddess. So thus, this is why, for example, in Sanatana Dharma, we refer to God, to the Absolute, to Brahman, as Sriman Narayana. And what does this term mean? Well, Sriman is referring to the feminine aspect of God, to Sri Lakshmi Devi, so thus Sriman. And then Narayana is referring to the more masculine aspect of God, so Vishnu. So this being the case, it is understood that when we look at that one ultimate being, in actuality, that one being metaphysically can be seen as having dual characteristics, and that is God, Goddess. The masculine and the feminine. And the way I've described this in the past, and especially for individuals who, let's say, you either grew up Christian or you're familiar with Christianity, I've given many talks over the years, including talks to Christian churches, etc., church groups, and this is how I've explained it in such a way that they could very much appreciate this idea. And that is in the same way that in Christianity, you have the idea of the Trinity. You have the idea that God is one, but at the same time you have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You can see that being functionally as three. Well, in a similar sort of way, much more sophisticated than that, but still in a similar sort of way, in Sanatana Dharma, again, we believe in one divine being, one God. But at the same time, functionally speaking, we can see that there is a dual aspect. Again, God, Goddess. And what that is known as, technically speaking, is the name of God is Sriman Narayana. But then, technically speaking, to explain this metaphysical concept of God as God, Goddess, we have this secondary term, Shakti-Shaktiman. And this is what we're going to be speaking about today to some degree. Let me say this. In fact, I was explaining to someone a short time ago. This will be the base foundation of what we're going to be talking about today. It's not going to be all that we'll be talking about, but it's important to understand this concept as well. And what is meant by Shakti-Shaktiman? Well, we understand that when we think of the Absolute, again, we think in terms of Sriman Narayana, of Radha Krishna, of Sita Rama, etc., etc., etc. In other words, the idea is that God ultimately is a dual being that is God and God's consort, and their relationship is a very special one, metaphysically speaking. And that is Shakti-Shaktiman. The goddess represents the Shakti, the energy, the potency, the power of God. And that is Shakti. Whereas Shaktiman, technically speaking, means that who is the possessor of that energy. And that is Narayana. Now, the example that I've given in a book very specifically about this exact topic, which is called the Shakti Principle, is this. It's similar to, imagine that you have a computer, and the computer is And it's a mechanism that can do so much. And you go to the computer and you try to operate the computer and it's not working. Well, why is it not working? You forgot to do one thing, to plug it into its energy source. So God, the masculine aspect, that is Shaktiman, is similar to the computer. Whereas Shakti, that is the feminine aspect, is similar to the power that operates the computer. So they have a symbiotic relationship. In fact, it's described philosophically as a divine moiety. And that means two beings who are perfectly intertwined, absolutely perfectly, and complement each other perfectly. So this is the ultimate idea of God, is that indeed God is this interplay of, on the one hand, the power, but then on the other hand, that which wields the power. And you have to have both. If you have power merely in a vacuum, well, that's dangerous. You can imagine a ball of lightning that is undirected. Oh, you want to stay away from that. But then on the other hand, if you have, let's say, that mechanism by which the power operates, but you don't have the power, well, then that mechanism is lacking, in the same way that, again, the computer that's not plugged in will be lacking. So this is a very crude way of understanding this concept of Shakti-Shaktiman, but this is indeed, in the briefest nutshell, how we view the absolute. This is our divine ontology, that ultimately God is Sriman Narayana, i.e. Shakti-Shaktiman. Again, if you want to know a lot more about this concept, then read my book called The Shakti Principle. To find that book very easily, you can go to our website, dharmacentral.com. And if you go to the book section, you'll see it there and you can order it very, very easily. Now, all that being said, I need to mention one more very important idea, and that is this. That when speaking about Shakti-Shaktiman, again, about the dual concept of goddess and God, it is important to understand that in accordance with Vedic spirituality, they are one being. Again, perceptually and functionally, we can perceive them as dual beings, but in actuality, there's no difference between them. They are ultimately one being. That being the case, it is important to understand that it's not just that, oh, Narayana is God, but Lakshmi isn't. No, they're both God, and they both have this absolute same powers. They are co-absolute. And how do we know this? Well, it says this throughout the entirety of the Vedic scriptures. So, for example, one famous place in the Vedic scriptures where it describes this is the Sri Sukta of Rig Veda, Ishvarim Sarvabhutanam. It says, speaking very specifically about Lakshmi Devi, and that is that Lakshmi is the mistress or the master of all beings. Now, this is a designation that is given to Vishnu, to Narayana, but here in the Sri Suktam, we see that the exact same definition also applies to Sri Lakshmi Devi. So indeed, they are co-absolute. Now, all that being said, as the very briefest base foundation of understanding this concept of Shakti-Shaktiman, now we're going to look at this verse from very specifically the Lakshmi Tantra. And this is a very nice verse, very beautiful verse. The Lakshmi Tantra, let me just say something about this work for a second, because very few people actually have encountered this work in the past. It's not one of the more well-known Vedic scriptures. And in fact, again, I think it was yesterday, actually, I was speaking with someone about this, how it's so amazing how the Lakshmi Tantra is one of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Vedic scriptures. And it's one of the lesser known ones. Again, very few people have read it. Very few people have even heard about it. I have, of course. I first read it maybe 25 years ago when I was in graduate school, actually. And it's a long work. It's over 30 chapters long. And it is very deep. It explains what is the nature of Lakshmi Devi, of Shri, what is the nature of Narayana, and it goes very, very deeply into metaphysics, very specifically. And yet it is a book that almost no one has heard of. And this just points to the richness of the Vedic scriptures. That we know the works that we know. We know, oh, Bhagavad Gita, all right. We know maybe Srimad Bhagavatam, maybe a few of the Upanishads. We have heard of Mahabharata. Very few people have read the entire Mahabharata because in translation into English, it's 12 volumes. It's very long. But we know a few of the works. But it's amazing to think how there are so many sacred texts that the vast majority of even Vedic practitioners, I'm not talking about the person on the street who has never encountered anything Vedic, even the majority of Vedic practitioners have not heard of. There are so many works like this. This is one of them, the Lakshmi Tantra. So in this section that we're going to be reading, Sri Lakshmi herself is speaking. So keep that in mind. Very, very important. So this is coming quite literally from the mouth of Goddess, from Shakti, ultimately the ultimate Shakti. That is that Goddess who is the source of all power, all energy, all prosperity, all abundance, etc., etc., etc. So this is not just anyone who's making the statement. Now, if you want to follow along, please go to the description and you'll see this verse there. And I will read this. This is from Lakshmi Tantra, chapter 8, verses 4 to 8. Sri Lakshmi said, Brahman is Narayana, the single, pure, and flawless one, devoid of any disturbance, undefinable, without vibration, matchless, unqualified, integral, undifferentiated, and changeless. All things contained in this world that are cognized, mentioned in the scriptures or inferred, all can be apprehended directly or indirectly through the three instruments of knowledge, whether of a positive or a negative nature, whether movable or immovable, subtle or gross, sentient or insentient. All these consist of Brahman, of Narayana, second to none. Brahman is bliss without nescience, pure, absolute, and concentrated consciousness, consisting of both the existent, that is reality, and its state of existence, the divine and ultimate goal of the spiritual way. It, that is Brahman, differentiates itself in two ways, both as possessor of Shakti and as the Shakti herself. Very good. Very long verse, and of necessity we'll have to go through this verse a little bit quickly, which makes me sad. I would like to spend like 2 hours going through this very long, amazing list of qualities of Narayana. So let's go through this, and we'll try to get through this quickly so we have time for questions and answers. So first of all, Brahman is Narayana. So here, Sri Lakshmi Devi is making this necessary equation, this philosophical equation between the technical and the personal. The technical term, Brahman, which is a philosophical term, but then the personal name of God, which is Narayana, and indeed saying that they are one. So this, of course, is in order to appeal to those individuals who are philosophically oriented and very specifically Vedantically oriented. What Sri Lakshmi Devi is saying here to Vedantists of every stripe is this Brahman, this subject of the Upanishads which you wish to attain, that Brahman is non-distinct from Narayana. So you wish to know Brahman? Know Narayana. Very simple. So here at the very outset, Sri Lakshmi Devi is making it very clear that Narayana is the absolute, period. Now let's go on. Now she gives qualifiers. The single. And again, we'll go through this pretty quickly, actually, because some of these they don't need a lot of explication. The single, in other words, again, one. God is one. God is, to use the Sanskrit, ekam. God is one unitary being, monadic in nature. So the single, pure and flawless one. And we'll take those as a unit, pure and flawless. So what does this mean? Well, we even know that within the material world, we want something that is of value. We want it to be pure and flawless. You want a diamond? You want a diamond that is pure and flawless, that has absolutely no problems with it whatsoever, where you take it to the greatest experts on diamonds, and they'll look at it and they'll say, this diamond is flawless. Well, this is the nature also of God. except not just within the realm of diamonds, but within the realm of quite literally all existent reality. In comparison to any and all things, what is Narayana? What is God? That being who is the purest of the pure, who is absolutely flawless, who has no mistakes in his character or in his being. Now, let's go on. Devoid of any disturbance. Very nice. Very nice. Who within the material world is not at one point or another disturbed? And more than this is certainly true as far as our terrestrial experience within this world, but then metaphysically speaking as well, we know that it is in the disturbance of, for example, Prakriti, of material energy, that then the material world comes about, etc., etc. There's so many different examples of disturbance leading to something that is not good. When we're disturbed, we have anxiety, etc. We all know that disturbance is a negative. Well, this is saying very, very simply that God, Narayana, has no such disturbance. That Narayana is ever in peace, is ever equipoised. Now let's go on. Undefinable. Indeed, by undefinable, what is meant is that to fully understand the full depths of God is not a possibility. We can try to approach God with the senses. Oh, we'll fail. We can try to approach God with something higher than the senses, with our intellect. Oh, we'll fail. We can understand God to some degree. We can have pointers to God with the intellect. But to fully understand what is the nature of God in the full depth of that meaning, no, ultimately God is not definable by intellect. Let's go on. Anahata, without vibration. Without vibration. It's interesting how this is something alone that I could actually talk about for several hours, believe it or not, without vibration. What is meant by that? Vibration, hatha versus anahata. Anahata. So by anahata, what is meant is that which is quite literally without material vibration. In other words, sound quality that is produced without, technically speaking, two things striking together. You see, what produces sound in the material world? It is two things striking together, even if it is the subtlest of two things. Even if it is air hitting a vocal cord, it's still two things striking together. But then there is that sound vibration, which is called anahata, where there is the sound, but it's not produced by anything material. So thus, without vibration. This is also part of the nature of God, that God, in other words, is fully transcendent, that God acts without acting materially. Now let's go on. Matchless, yes. Matchless. That if we try to compare anything to God, if we say, oh yeah, God is pretty good, but what about this? What about that? We will look like a fool. Because God is matchless. Because whatever that thing is that you will try to compare to God, God is the source of that. God is the origin of that. God is the father of that. So that being the case, God is quite literally matchless. There is no one and nothing like God. Unqualified. Indeed, God is unqualified by material attributes, by material qualifications. So in other words, we look at anything within the material world, and anything that we can perceive or conceive that is material in nature has material qualifiers. Well, God being a being who transcends materiality, God does not have material qualifiers. In other words, it's not possible to say that, oh, God is 6'7". You see, that's what's meant by a qualifier. You're trying to qualify what is meant by God by using material means. This is anthropomorphism. So the idea of taking that which is material and then trying to ascribe it to God, trying to ascribe those qualities to God. You see, it's not that God is without qualities. God is without material qualities. The spiritual qualities of God cannot be understood in quantitative terms, but only qualitative, i.e., they can only be experienced. Let's go on. Integral. Indeed, integral. God is a being who is whole in nature, and I've spoken about this many, many times in the past. God is not fragmented, God is not divided against himself, etc. See, with any of us, we have an almost unlimited number of ways in which we can know, if we're honest, that we're not God. And this is one of them. We are fragmented. You are fragmented. And I'm speaking very specifically right now to that Advaitin in the audience who thinks that he's God. You're not God. You can't even control your own mind. Often your mind can't 100% even control your own body. We are fragmented beings, as human beings, as beings who are here in illusion. That is, the various aspects of who we are, the very ontological strata that comprise what is called the human person, often is at war with itself. This is why the will wish something, but then we can't do it, etc. Well, God is the opposite of that. God is an integral being, and there is no division within God. Let's go on. Undifferentiated. So again, pretty much saying the same thing as unqualified. And that is that God, in God's own being itself, in the very essence of what God is undifferentiated, meaning that there is no division within God. And changeless. And indeed changeless. God is indeed pure being. There is no becoming in God. Becoming is an activity that applies only to materiality. But in actuality, God being transcendent even to time itself, even to space itself, and to causality itself, God never changes. God only is. Now let's go on. All things contained in this world are cognized, and there are three things that are here actually, but let's start with this. All things that are contained in this world. So now Lakshmi is making a shift, going first from speaking about, again, divine ontology. What is the nature of Narayana? What is the nature of the ultimate absolute truth? To now talking about our experience within this material world. So she says, all things contained in this world are cognized. In other words, we know through the senses. We see, we hear, we smell, we touch, etc., etc. But now she goes on. Or mentioned in the scriptures, this is B, that is that there are things that we wish to know that are beyond the ability of our senses to perceive. So thus we rely on the Vedic scriptures. And we have to make this very clear. Mentioned in the scriptures. We're not talking about the Bible or the Quran or any other scripture. We're talking exclusively about one set of scriptures that is known as the Vedic scriptures. So this is the second way of knowing. Or inferred. Or inferred. In other words, using the intellect. So by inferential reasoning, we have the ability to cognize things, to know things within the material world. And now she goes on. All that can be apprehended, either directly or indirectly, through the three instruments of knowledge. Now let's stop there. Let's pause here for a moment. And again, I could go extremely deeply into what is meant by these three instruments of knowledge, but I won't. But let's look a little bit at what these three instruments of knowledge is, what these are. These are the three pramanas. These are the three valid ways of knowing anything. So what are these three? The first of these is pratyaksha, or again, empiricism through the senses, anumana, or inferential reasoning, that is thinking, and then finally shabda, or knowing via the revealed scriptures. So this is what Lakshmi is saying here. These are the three instruments of knowledge. And now we continue. Whether movable or immovable, and that doesn't require a lot of commentary. We understand what that means. Subtle or gross, sentient or insentient. And now comes the point. All these consist of Brahman, of Narayana. In other words, what Lakshmi is saying here is very simply what I always say, but in just different words. Everything and anything perceptual or conceivable has Narayana as their sustainer. Wherever you are, do you have eyes? Look around you. Do you have ears? Listen. Go anywhere. Use your five senses. Close your eyes. Think of any conception that you can have, of any fantasy, of any logical idea, of any mathematical formulation. Think, see, etc. Anything that will come, that could come, potentially even, into your experience has Brahman, Narayana, as its source and as its sustaining foundation. This is what Lakshmi is saying here. So all these consist of Brahman, of Narayana, and that Narayana who is second to none. Who is second to none. So again, what does that mean? See, it's interesting how we wish to understand what is the nature of reality on the one hand, but then on the other hand, when we're given the answer as to what is the nature of reality, we can very, very quickly just zoom by it without really even noticing. This is why we have to be very careful in looking at the Vedic scriptures. So what is meant by second to none? That again, this being is the supreme being, that than which nothing greater can be conceived. And this is very important, that if we wish to understand what is the nature of God, this is the beginning of understanding what is the nature of God. That God is indeed that being who is second to none, second to no one. In other words, the highest. Now let's go on. Brahman is bliss without nescience. This is very beautiful. Brahman, God, Narayana, is bliss, but what kind of bliss? Let's stop there for a moment. Every single living being, without exception, is seeking bliss. Period. Whether that being is even fully aware of that or not doesn't matter. Whether that being will even admit that or not, it doesn't matter. Every being is seeking bliss. The only question being, is that person, is that animal, is that whatever, that living entity, seeking bliss in the right way? In other words, is it seeking that bliss which is of the ultimate, which is permanent, which is transcendental, etc.? Or is it seeking what it thinks is bliss, but in actuality is just an illusion? Now, all that being said, let's go through this section very, very nicely. Brahman is bliss, but what kind of bliss? Without nescience. Nescience means ignorance. Nescience means the opposite of science. Science meaning to know. So, God is bliss, but without stupidity. God is bliss, but without short-sightedness. God is bliss, but again, without ignorance. Now let's go on with this. A bliss that is pure. So again, a bliss that is untainted by anything that is its opposite. This is the nature of God. That God is not just bliss, but a bliss that is not self-centered, a bliss that, again, is not based on ignorance, etc., but pure bliss. Bliss in and of itself as a quality that is innate to his very essence as God, but then something that we also share in as Atmans, having God as our source. So we also have bliss that is ultimately pure, and we can experience this. And now let's go on. Bliss that is absolute. Bliss that is, again, second to none, compared to which any other form of bliss, whatever it is, I love the bliss of eating, I love the bliss of sex, I love the bliss of this, of that, of alcohol, etc., etc. No, this is the supreme bliss. This is a bliss that is absolute in nature. Now let's go on. So Brahman is bliss with all of these qualities, and a concentrated consciousness. God is concentrated consciousness. What is meant by that? Well, we all have our consciousness, being a spark of God, in which our very essence shares in the attributive essence of God. That is, we ourselves, being attributes of God, we also share in the fact that God, being consciousness, we also have consciousness. But more, it says here, Sri Lakshmi says, that Brahman, that God, is concentrated consciousness. In other words, the form of all consciousness itself, the source of consciousness as a very Shakti itself, as a power itself. So this is God, another of many hundreds and thousands of indicators that show us that we are not God, because we are not concentrated consciousness. We are not, in other words, the source of all consciousness and every living being. Only God is that. Very good. And now, consisting of both the existent, that is reality in and of itself, and its state of existence. What is meant by the state of existence? That which upholds existence. So there is existence, and this gets a little technical. There is existence as object. That is, as that existence is seen objectively by God as subjective being. So this is what is meant by the existent itself and its state of existence. In other words, what gives existence its actual sustaining feature to exist. God is both. God is the source of both. Very good. And then we go on. The divine and ultimate goal of the spiritual way. So God is both divine, that is, God is the reason why we are on the spiritual path, but more, God is Narayana. Let's not use the word God anymore, because Lakshmi makes this very clear. We're talking about Narayana. Narayana is the ultimate goal of the spiritual path, of the spiritual way. So if you are an individual and you are practicing spirituality with any form of sincerity whatsoever, then your goal is Narayana. This is what Sri Lakshmi Devi is saying. And then, finally, this last sentence, which is crucial, which is very, very crucial actually, because it affirms perfectly and without argument everything that we had said previously about the very concept of the divine ontology of Shakti-Shaktiman that I explained before we even began looking at this verse. And let's read this very last sentence. Still giving this qualification, explaining what is the nature of God, Sri Lakshmi Devi herself says, it, that is, Brahman, differentiates itself in two ways. So again, everything that we say is based on the scriptures. This is crucial. I'm not even going to go on just yet to look at what is actually being said here. This is of importance. Whenever it is the case that we have an individual in fancy robes, and however they look, claiming to be a spiritual authority, and what does that mean in 2022? You go to YouTube, Swami so-and-so, Sadguru so-and-so, Yogi so-and-so, Acharya so-and-so, etc., etc., etc. When they make any proclamation, it needs to be of necessity backed up by scriptural reference. And here we have right here the scriptural reference showing indeed what I was saying earlier, that God ultimately is God Goddess, that God is two. God is one being who can be seen functionally as two beings, as, again, Sriman Narayana, as Shakti-Shaktiman. So Brahman differentiates itself in two ways. And now Sri Lakshmi explains exactly Shakti-Shaktiman as the possessor of Shakti, that is Shaktiman, and as the Shakti herself. As the Shakti herself. So what a truly wonderful, really beautiful way of ending this. By, again, Sri Lakshmi herself in the Lakshmi Tantra explaining exactly this concept, this principle of Shakti-Shaktiman, that this is the nature of God, that God necessarily both is the energy, the power, the feminine, the divine consort, the goddess, but also Shaktiman, the masculine, that being who is the director of that energy. So let me read this just one more time so that we fully understand this. Brahman differentiates itself in two ways, both as possessor of Shakti, that is Shaktiman, and as the Shakti herself, i.e. Shakti. So here we have it. This is the divine ontology of Shakti-Shaktiman. This verse very beautifully explains this deep philosophical concept, which radically orthodox Vedic people have always known. You know, even previous to my writing the Shakti principle, it's not that this concept of Shakti-Shaktiman was not known. It certainly was by some people, by truly, truly radically orthodox traditionalist followers of Sanatana Dharma. But very sadly, up until the time of my writing this book, it was not known by many people, other than, again, a few true experts and truly, truly authentic gurus. Well, now we understand how this very important concept of Shakti-Shaktiman is scripturally based. It is logical, it is rational, it is reasonable, etc. And it is indeed how we view the highest nature of God and of spiritual reality, i.e. God, Brahman. That God is God Goddess, that God is Lakshmi Narayana, that God is Sriman Narayana, that God is Shakti, Shaktiman. Seen, if we wish to, as two, but in actuality, non-distinct. Very good. All that being said, I will now end my talk for now. Needless to say, I zoomed through these verses. These are verses, the nature of which, if you have listened to any of my talks previously, you know easily we could have spoken about these 4 verses actually for hours and hours and hours. There is tremendous philosophical content that is contained in these verses. But of necessity, I wanted to be a little bit quick so that we could see what questions there are. So with that, I thank you very much for being here and listening to my talk. And with that, if there are any questions, now is the time to please feel free to ask your questions. And as I always say to people, questions about Sanatana Dharma, not other religions, and not questions about politics or anything else, just questions about any aspect really of the Vedic tradition. So a very nice comment from Mr. Oldenswolf. Jai Shri Guru. Thank you for this wonderful teaching. Jaya Sriman Narayana. My pleasure. Very nice. Here is a very relevant question from Nick, actually. And this is very nice that it deals very specifically with what we've been talking about. And that is, Namaste Acharyaji, how should we honor Sri Mahalakshmi in puja after reciting her mantra and making the cyclical offering? Are there additional sayings, prayers, or thoughts to focus on? Thank you. Yes, absolutely. There are quite a few actually, but the primary of which is indeed known as the Sri Suktam. The Sri Suktam is an appendix to Rig Veda, and it is a hymn very specifically to Lakshmi Devi. And to recite it, of course, that takes practice. But what's nice is that if you go to YouTube and you simply look up that term Sri Suktam or Sri Sukta as well, you can look up, it's the same thing. You will find this hymn recited very beautifully, often with music, sometimes without music. So what is very nice is indeed to meditate upon the Sri Suktam. You can certainly find a translation to this as well, but even just listening to the Sanskrit. So after you do puja and you offer puja to Lakshmi and you say the Lakshmi mantra, you can, if you wish, just listen to the Sri Suktam. And if it gets to the point where you practice and practice, you can even recite it yourself. So that is definitely what I would recommend. good. Yeah, let me address this actually. The question is, Namaste Acharyaji, can you talk about the Vedic sky god Dyaus and his role in the pantheon? Yes, I can, actually, but I won't. And the reason why is because, and no disrespect to your question, that's an academic question, and I don't answer academic questions. I'm not a professor. I don't wish to be a professor. It's not really a spiritual question per se. I tend to answer spiritual questions that are going to help people to grow spiritually. This is an academic question that, again, any professor can answer. So can I answer it? Yes, in great detail, but I'm not going to for that reason. I'm not a professor, I'm a guru. So if you want to know the meaning of life, that I can help you with. Very good. Here is a question from Varsaga. Sometimes when I read scriptures, my mind will reject what I read due to ego. How do we overcome doubt and rejection of truth? Good question. Very good, very personal question, and I will definitely answer this. Of course, this is, let's say, a small part of what is the greater question of how it is that we avoid doubt. See, the truth of the matter is, whether it's scripture, whether it's listening to an authentic guru, whether it's indeed something as personal as we ourselves can be steeped in meditation, practicing meditation, and we can begin to experience God. Whatever it is, we can experience doubt. And indeed, this is the nature of ego. This is the nature of what it means to be an illusion. That we see this all the time. I see this all the time. That indeed, we can have truth right in front of us and we'll look past it. We'll try to pretend that it's not there. So this is indeed the nature of ego. Now, in dealing with the scriptures very specifically, let me focus on that. There are several things that will help us to relieve ourselves of doubt when it comes to studying the scriptures. First of all, it's important to understand what is the very nature of scripture itself. If you understand what it is that makes these words in what we call the Veda Shastra, the actual scriptures, unique and very different from just reading a book or reading some new age, pop star's latest book or something like that. What makes the Vedic scriptures something that is very different is the fact that what the Vedic scriptures are revealing is divine sound vibration that in a way is non-different from God himself. If you understand the sacredness of Vedic scripture and how it's not just a matter of, as I was saying before, it's not just, like other scriptures. Rather, it's something that is very unique. This is something that is very helpful. The other thing is, as you are reading Vedic scriptures, very often, as we have experienced many times, it's very common to be reading something and not quite understand 100% what it is that those verses are saying to us. If that's the case, can you even be 100% blamed for having doubt? If you're reading something and it's either confusing or you think you understand it, but no, not really, you have a misunderstanding of it, but the misunderstanding leads to doubt. Well, this is indeed why we need guidance in reading the Vedic scriptures. This is why I try to explain to people that reading the Mahabharata, reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, reading the Yoga Sutras, Narada Bhakti Sutras, Upanishads, any of these works, it's not like reading just any other book, where you just sit there with the book, you struggle with the concept, and you try to, quote-unquote, figure it out. If that is the approach, then yes, there will be doubt. Rather, to come to a perfect and truly crystal clear understanding of what these works are saying to us, you have to have guidance. You have to have either guru or you have to have authorized representatives of the guru to help you to understand the Vedic scriptures. So this is the other thing that I would say is seek guidance as much as possible. I sadly am busy beyond human comprehension, so I can't guide everyone one-on-one through the scriptures, but certainly listening to live streams like this where we go through many of the scriptures, but also, again, joining our Discord server where I have many of my students who are there who know the scriptures quite well and who are indeed authorized to help people to understand the scriptures. I would say definitely try to do that as much as you can. So I hope that was helpful. There's a lot more I could say, but I do want to get to other people's questions. Nice. Here's a very, very nice question, actually. This is from Gideon Long, and it is it okay? First you say, Namaste Acharyaji, Sri Acharya, and Namaste to you as well. Is it okay to pray to Jesus and ask for guidance if we still feel an attachment to him due to family circumstances? And you are asking as an ex-Christian upbringing. Very good. Let me answer in this way. Actually, the greater question is it all right to pray to your guru and the great gurus of the past for guidance? The answer is yes. And who is Jesus? He is a guru. So the truth of the matter is, yes, it is perfectly fine to pray to Jesus for guidance in your life. And especially, as you say, as an ex-Christian, as someone who was brought up as a Christian, so thus you're familiar and comfortable with Jesus as a spiritual teacher. And again, understanding who he is, and that is the Vedic concept. He is not God quite literally. He's not God per se, but he is a representative of God. He is an Avesha avatar. He is one of the personifications of God's mercy, God's grace upon the earth when he was here 2,000 years ago. Understanding this, that God is a guru, absolutely, it's perfectly fine to pray to Jesus for guidance. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. We accept Jesus as a guru. And why? Again, because of what I was saying before, because the Vedic scriptures say he is. The Bhavishya Purana speak of Jesus as a pure guru. So that being the case, yes, please, you can turn to Jesus for guidance. That's perfectly fine. Very good. And give me a moment, please, as I look at these questions. We have about 6 minutes, so at this point I have to be a little bit picky as far as which questions I choose. So give me a moment. Let us see. Nick, I can indeed answer your question about the nature of women, but not in this venue, very sadly. Maybe in some other more neutral and fair venue without censorship. I can answer that, but not here, sadly. Very good, very nice. Here's a question from Jesse Mosa, and it's a grammatical question actually, dealing with Sanskrit grammar, and it's a good question actually, because this is something that I'm sure a lot of people would be interested in knowing, and that is Namaste Acharyaji, and Namaste to you as well, Jesse. Can you please help me understand the distinction between name uses, i.e. Radha, Radhe? Is one direct address, you, and the other indirect, she? Thank you. Very good, very nice. The distinction between Radha and Radhe are this. Radha is indeed the direct name of Radharani, whereas Radhe is what's called the vocative. In other words, when you're saying, oh Radha, so yes, when you are addressing Radha very specifically. So again, the first, simply Radha, is just the actual name itself. So you could be talking about her in any way. You could be saying, oh, Radha is very beautiful, like this. But then if you're addressing Radharani herself, then you say Radhe, Radhe. Then you're saying, oh, Radha, and you're addressing her herself. So that's the distinction. And unfortunately, I've seen that many people don't understand that distinction. and they'll use them as if they're the same thing. No, they're not. When you're saying Radhe, you are addressing Radha specifically. When you're saying Radha, you're speaking about Radha. So I hope that answers the question. Very nice. Here's a good, very practical economic question, personal economics, from Zachariah Hines. And you say, Jaya Shri Guru, thank you for the beautiful talk. My absolute pleasure. What is the Vedic way of saving, budgeting one's earnings in order to better serve God and reach personal goals? And thank you for these satsangas. Again, my absolute pleasure. To my knowledge, there is no one specific way of engaging in saving money in the Vedic context that's different from just common sense. That is, you simply save. That is, if you have excess, once you have your actual income that is there present before you, and you take care of all your immediate expenses, whatever then is left over would be savings. Savings is something that is very much encouraged. It's always been encouraged in the Vedic context, in Vedic economics, Vedic civilization. The idea is that, of course, the savings are to be accumulated not just for the very sake of saving itself, and certainly not for greed purposes, but for two purposes. A, in order to then accumulate those savings even more, but ultimately with the idea that you will use those savings for good, i.e. you will use those savings for dharma. The idea of giving is something that is crucial to what it means to be a Vedic individual or to have a Vedic family. That is, again, you give of excess. When your immediate needs are taken care of, then you give in charity. You give to your local temple. You give to a guru. You give to a Vedic mission, etc., etc. But you also give to the poor. You give to help others. You give to family members who are experiencing hard times, etc. That's what you should do with the savings. As far as the creation of savings, yes, that should be done in any logical way. So it's kind of common sense. Whatever after your immediate expenses are taken care of, whatever is then left over, whatever is then excess, you try to save in any way that you can. And it's definitely always good to try to save. Very good. Here is a very interesting question, and we only have about a minute. This may or may not be the last question that we'll get to. We'll see. This is from Mr. Oldenswolf, and it is Namaste Acharyaji. Are there colors in clothing which should not be worn to temple or ISDS events? Thank you very much. And honestly, I would say that no, there are no colors that you should not wear. I wear every sort of color, as you've probably seen. You can look at all the previous live stream videos, all the recordings, and right now I'm wearing kind of a very nice purple. I will wear blue. I will wear white. I'll wear yellow, orange, all sorts of colors. Indeed, when I am dressed in my civilian wear, for lack of a better term, i.e. when I'm going to the grocery store and I'm not dressed as an acharya, I'm just dressed very normally. Sometimes I'll wear black. I like the look of black. I'll wear a black shirt or something like that. So no, there are no hard or fast rules in any way as far as certainly coming to our temple, the ISDS temple. So not something I would worry about in any way. Very good. I want to see, as always, if there is maybe one last question that I can answer very, very quickly. And I do not see anything right now. So I believe we will end here. It's exactly the top of the hour, exactly 8 p.m. Omaha time. And before we end, I do want to say one thing, again, something that I very often forget. And it's their fault. It's because they're so good at their jobs, I don't notice them. And that is, I want to thank the moderators. I do the speaking, I do the talking, but the moderators are these behind the scenes, wonderful little hidden beings who make sure that this is a safe place, that this is a wonderful area that's kept positive, that's kept spiritual, that's kept pure, without weird people coming in and trying to disrupt it in any way. So I want to thank all of our moderators, some of whom you see, but trust me, we have more moderators than you know. We have some moderators who I know they're here. They don't necessarily make comments or anything. They are just here behind the scenes, again, making sure that everything runs smoothly and that this continues to be a sacred space. Because this is what we try to do every week. And that's what makes what we do something very different from any other spiritual gathering of any sort, online or in real life. This is what makes what we do different. And that is that we indeed try to make these weekly online live stream satsanghas a sacred space for you. Because this is what we need today. You know, we know that we're living in a world where, it's crazy. I can go on for a long time, as you know, about how insane the world has been, how much suffering there is that's here, how much seeming meaninglessness has been pumped into people's psyche, where people just feel lost and they feel alone. And what we try to do is indeed to make these live streams into a sacred space where you can come once a week and it's live and you can feel that you are not alone. Rather, you're here with other people who are like you in one way or another, who are sincere people, who are intelligent people, who want to know the truth and who don't just say they want to know the truth, which is talk is cheap, but who really want to know the truth and who want to live the truth in as authentic and pure a way as possible. That's what we try to create here for you to the best of our ability with the technology that God actually has given us. So, indeed, this is why I always thank you for being here in every way, and why I must thank the moderators too, because they also help in every way to keep this a sacred space. So with that, I thank you again for being here. Again, please, if you have a chance, go to Amazon and look up Principles of Perfect Leadership. Principles of Perfect Leadership. That is our brand new book that has just come out about 2 days ago. It's come out so recently, I don't even have a copy to show you. I'm waiting for my copies to arrive. But when you have a chance, please look up the book on Amazon. Purchase your copy as soon as you can. And next week, God willing, I'll have a copy here that I'll be able to show you, and the next live stream will be focused on that brand new wonderful book, Principles of Perfect Leadership. With that, everyone, we will see you again next Monday. Namaste. Jaya Sriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. Surya Vangsha Jayate. International Sanatana Dharma Society Jayate. Om Tat Sat. And with that, everyone, until the next time that we get together, I ask you all to please stay healthy, stay well, and take care of yourselves in every way.